Good morning, everyone. This is Leanne Griffin with FADA. We do expect to get started on time in about 5 minutes. In the meantime, I have dropped in some technical information in the chat panel that may be helpful to you. And we will reconnect in about 5 minutes. Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I'm Leanne Griffin, and on behalf of the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association, welcome to today's webinar entitled Substance Abuse Treatment for Adolescents. This webinar is being made available through a collaboration of the Florida Department of Children and Families, Office of Substance Abuse and Mental Health, and the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association. Note that as an attendee, you are in listen-only mode and will only be able to view your own name in the participant list. If you have questions today, please send them to the presenter and me, I'm the host, by using the Q&A panel. The icon to open the panel is located at the upper right side of your monitor. And you may use the Q&A panel to send questions as you think of them throughout the presentation today, and our presenter will answer those questions at designated times throughout the presentation. Our audio is being broadcast through the internet to your computer. However, if you experience poor computer audio, there are a few options to try on screen right now, and these options are posted in the chat panel as well. If you experience a loss of the computer audio or poor audio through the computer, you can always try rejoining the webinar and call in using the telephone I will call in option. You must be connected to the audio portion of the presentation and view it on screen as well to receive a statement of credit. The recording and materials used in today's presentation will be available on the FADA website within 5 business days. And the PDF version of this PowerPoint presentation will be emailed to participants also within that time frame. As many of you know, FADA produces many webinars and workshops through the support of the Florida Department of Children and Families. FADA hosts an online community that provides a personalized digital journal where participants can maintain statements of credit for every webinar and workshop taken through the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association. At the conclusion of today's webinar, as usual, the web browser will direct everyone to an evaluation form on the FADA website. You will be prompted to register or sign in to complete the evaluation. Once you do register and complete the evaluation, you'll be able to access a statement of credit right within your member profile. Do keep in mind that any information you provide FADA as part of registering does remain confidential. Also, as usual, completing the evaluation is necessary in order to receive CE credits or to access your statement of credit. And do please note that the evaluation will close at midnight on Monday, July 2. Approximately 1 to 2 continuing education credits are available for participating in today's webinar for persons licensed through the Board of Nursing, the Board of Clinical Social Work, Marriage and Family Therapy, and Mental Health Counseling, and for persons credentialed through the Florida Certification Board. If you are a licensed healthcare practitioner, do be sure to include your Florida license number for reporting to CE Broker when you register with our site for the first time. If you're certified through the Florida Certification Board or licensed outside the state of Florida, you do not need to provide your certification number when you register with our site. And do note that WebEx monitors arrival and departure of attendees and provides a report upon completion of the event. We are not permitted to provide contact hours or a statement of credit if you do not attend the entire webinar, and we're not permitted to provide partial credit. And if I haven't said so already, registering with the online community is free. And we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of today's presentation. For now, let's go ahead and get started. Jaime Houston-Mulligan has nearly 20 years of experience implementing and supervising evidence-based programs in the community and training professionals on the use of evidence-based treatments for treating adolescents. She is presently the director of the Contingency Management for Youth Addiction Program, where she provides expert clinical guidance and quality assurance monitoring for the providers of contingency management and leads the program's NIH NIDA-funded research. In addition, she is on the staff of Penn State Hershey Medical Center, where she trains psychiatric fellows how to effectively treat adolescent substance abuse. And we're very pleased to have Dr. Houston-Mulligan join us today. And Jaime, if you're ready, I'm going to bring up your presentation and then transfer control over to you.
That sounds great. Okay. Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. So let's just kind of jump right into it. If you do have questions, feel free to put them in the little chat or Q&A section, and we'll maybe answer some along the way if we can, but otherwise we'll definitely get to them at the break. So today's objectives are to look at evidence-based treatments for adolescents and some of the data around the effectiveness, look at those common profiles of adolescents presenting in treatment, and then we're going to use a case example that we're going to kind of weave through the presentation to show you how these different approaches would handle misuse challenges from each of their perspectives. And this is how we're going to reach those objectives. We're going to start off just talking about normal adolescent development, kind of bringing us all back to what it meant to be an adolescent. Look at what the impact of substance misuse, as we often call it, has on adolescent development, what their unique developmental needs and that substance use impact has on treatment. 3 evidence-based treatments we'll look at. Like I said, we'll have the case example, we'll wrap up and look at some take-home points and, of course, get some questions through along the way. So just to kind of get everybody on the same page on what we currently know about adolescent substance abuse, about 9.2% of the U.S. population in general has abused drugs. About 3,400 teens start using drugs each day, and that's new use, so that's a pretty significant number. We also know that youth are highly represented in the juvenile justice system with substance use problems. About 60 to 90% of youth involved in juvenile court have a substance use problem. And we also know that about 2 million adolescents needed treatment each year, but only 1% ever received that treatment. And we're going to kind of come back to that because that's a pretty notable discrepancy between need for treatment and actually receiving treatment. And the last thing that I always find interesting is that 90% of adults with a substance use disorder started using before age 18. So we can almost think of substance abuse as a disorder of adolescence in a sense, because it starts in those adolescent years. And if you start using before age 18, there's a chance that it will become a lifelong challenge for you. We also know that substance use is just a serious public health issue, and I feel silly reviewing that because I think it's been in the news so much that everyone's pretty well aware of it. But it does cost about $400 billion annually. It is exceeding all other health concerns. So you name it, substance use costs more than anything else out there that we deal with. And for adolescents, unsurprisingly, it impacts their educational achievements, their mental health, their social relationships, their employability, their physical health. It really impacts their entire ecology and their entire developmental trajectory. And we also know that adolescents with substance use disorders are 2 to 8 times more likely to acquire HIV, sexually transmitted diseases, relative to their peers without a substance use disorder. And that's not just use with chronic use, that is adolescents experimenting, using a couple times, increases their risk. And as you can imagine, getting some of those disorders now becomes a lifelong challenge that you have to manage. So that's incredibly problematic. So adolescents do differ from adults in the substances that they use. So as you can see, the blue bars are that 12 to 17 age range. The 18 to 25 age range is what we call emerging adults. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the brain development and why we call them emerging adults. And then the green line is the 26 plus, so we're talking about adults. And as you can see, the blue bars make it pretty clear that for adolescents, marijuana is the majority of the use, is what you're going to see in practice, followed by alcohol, and then concerningly, prescription drugs. That one continues to go up, and I'm sure nobody's surprised by that. So, and then of course we have the other ones as you tail off to the right, they're a whole lot lower. But most likely what you're going to see when a youth comes in for treatment is marijuana use, alcohol use, and prescription drug abuse. I think another interesting thing is the prescription drug abuse for the emerging adults, that orange bar, that's the highest reported misuse now for that age range. So that's particularly concerning. And we have seen a lot of providers who work with adolescents starting to treat folks in that younger adult age. So when you do that, you almost have to shift your thinking as far as what drugs they're likely to come in with, because we know that prescription drug abuse for that age group is getting a lot higher, and obviously quite fatal at times, and also difficult to test for. So as you can see, adolescents present a bit differently. Adults are more likely to come in with alcohol use. They also have very high prescription drug abuse. But you can see where the adolescents typically fall. So what do we know about adolescents? I think when you work with teenagers, it's always good to bring ourselves back to what it means to be a normal teen and what it means to be a teen that's having a little bit of struggles. So what we look for in the teen years is a whole bunch of stuff. We want them to become more independent. They start taking on new roles and responsibilities. They're more active and more social. Their peers are becoming more important. They're becoming more of an authority than other adults in their life. Teens are experimenting more. They're taking risks. And these are great things. Like, these are things that teenagers need in order to reach their potential, in order to test their limits and see who they're going to become. So these are wonderful things for us to see teenagers doing. We want them to take some reasonable risks. As long as there's a bit of a safety net to catch them. We want them to be social. We want them to start connecting strongly with their peers, because that's who they're going to grow up and old with. We want them to take on roles and responsibilities. So these are all great things. But as you can imagine, some of these things could set kids up for taking risks that aren't always so safe, experimenting with things maybe they shouldn't be, listening to peers that possibly aren't giving them the best advice. So there are some challenges in just this normal, wonderful adolescent development that we see. Now, when we have, what we also see is that there are some challenges to that as well. Teenagers are more sensitive to what we call disruptions of memory. It always seems like they're telling us, I don't remember you saying that, you gave me therapy homework, I don't remember you doing that, I forgot to do it. It can be true sometimes. They do struggle a bit with that memory. They do have enhanced excitement seeking, so they are going to be gravitating towards those things that are a little more exciting than we'd like to see them do. And unfortunately, they do have an underdeveloped capacity to delay gratification. So if they want it now, they want it now. And it's not in a bad way, it just hasn't been developed yet for them. And for teens, things happening in the future are less meaningful. They're more here and now thinkers. They're worried about what's going on right in front of them, who's talking to so-and-so, what's going on. The future doesn't mean a lot. And they have an underdeveloped capacity to weigh priorities and plan ahead. So they don't necessarily do those pro and con activities we might want them to do, or look at the costs and benefits of things. They're more concerned about what's going to get me to where I want to go right now. And how do I want to get there? I'm not too concerned about, where I'm going to be in 30 years. And they are less able to manage competing tasks. And that's where that easy frustration comes from. Loading them up with a lot of competing tasks can be very frustrating and difficult to manage. So like we talked about on the last slide, these are what we want to see teens doing: social, experimenting, risk-taking. But unfortunately, it comes with a little bit of this baggage where they do struggle to plan ahead. They do struggle to deal with frustration. They do have difficulty delaying gratification. So as you can imagine, it's not a surprise that substance abuse can be so prevalent amongst teenagers. Here and now thinkers, I'm having fun, my peers are super important, these are the things I want to do, I'm having a great time. What happens down the road doesn't really matter as much to me as what's happening right now. So that's normal teen development. That's what we're going to see with any old teenager we pass on the street. Those are the struggles and the challenges they're dealing with every day as they move towards adulthood. But what do we know about the teens that come in for treatment? Is there anything different about them that we need to be aware of in addition to just those normal challenges? Well, yeah, there are some things that we do know are slightly different about teens coming in for substance abuse treatment. So some really great research has been done looking at teens and how can we engage them better in treatment, how can we keep them in treatment longer. We know that there's a magic formula to addiction treatment, that if you can get people coming in regularly for as long as possible, they're more likely to achieve success. But we also know that that's a challenge with teenagers, getting them in and keeping them in for the full dosage, in a sense, of the treatment. So to combat that, we need to learn what are the challenges kids with substance abuse issues have on top of those normal adolescent issues. Well, they have a very low motivation to change. That's, of course, true for most teenagers. They usually like who they are and they don't want to change a lot. But kids in treatment really have a low motivation to change. What we hear is that the substance use is solving a problem for them. It's meeting some kind of need. Maybe it's a social need. Maybe it's to manage some mental health concerns. Maybe it's an escape tool for conflict or issues at home. So stopping that, magical solution you've landed on, not feeling particularly motivated to do it. They also don't see the substance use as problematic. And we know that to motivate people to change, we also have to show them, or often have to show them, that whatever they're doing is causing them some kind of problem as a bit of a motivator. The teens aren't really making that connection, whereas we as providers might see that, well, the drug use is causing conflict at home. That's why you're not on the football team anymore. It's impacting your grades. It's going to have long-term effects for you. They're not making those connections at all. So talking about them isn't always the best route because those problems aren't meaning a lot to them. They're not making that connection between the issues that they're having and the substance use. And kind of related to that, they don't really view quitting as urgent because lots of teens haven't experienced negative consequences. And one thing I hear from folks when we do trainings is, well, yeah, they do. Maybe they're on probation, they're on house arrest, they have been locked up, they're going to court, they're in trouble at school. Absolutely, those are all very negative consequences. But if we look at behavior change and the research around behavior modification, we know that a consequence needs to be pretty immediate and pretty powerful. And especially when we're dealing with teenagers who are here and now thinkers, having a delayed consequence of, well, if you test positive, then when we go back to court, I'm going to report that back to the judge and, whatever might happen. It's just too delayed. So when they're in that moment with their friends and they're feeling peer pressure or whatever it might be, they're not thinking in their head, but if I happen to get tested and if it happens to come up positive, I might get in trouble a month down the road. It just doesn't have a lot of meaning to them versus adults who might have very immediate negative consequences. They could lose their jobs, their homes, they could have issues with their spouses, their children, anyone in their life, their family. Adults are able to make those connections far better than teenagers because, like we said, teens struggle with cause and effect. So when we see teens in treatment, this is what we often see, is that our effort to teach them about the negative consequences of the behavior is kind of falling on deaf ears a lot of times. We also know that teens have a low motivation to remain abstinent. So we may be doing great in treatment, they are reaching their goals, we've had negative drug screens, everybody's high-fiving and super excited, we discharge, we have a party, there's balloons, whatever it might be. A few weeks down the road, we hear they're back at it. And it's incredibly discouraging, but it's also not surprising because what we often see is that teens, again, they have those external pressures and they have those internal struggles with making those connections. And when they run into those issues again in their life, whatever they might be, that peer pressure, the problems at home, issues at school, whatever it might be, when they run into it again, they still have a pretty limited toolbox of skills to manage that kind of frustration in life, and they often go back to it. And a big reason is this final bullet, which I always find to be kind of the most depressing in a sense, is when we talk to teens and we figure out what's going on in their heads, they don't believe they can do it. They don't believe they can quit. And if you're in treatment and you're trying to make dramatic changes to your life, if you in the back of your head think, I can't do this, it's no surprise that it can be very difficult to be successful. And the low belief that they can quit is kind of that mashup of those developmental issues they have, where they still are building that toolbox. They feel trapped in their lives, like they can't just up and move or leave school or decide, I'm not living with my family anymore, I'm going to go find a new family. So a lot of those challenges that come at them from all different directions really fuel that belief that I can't do this, this isn't going to happen, I'm not going to be able to be successful with this. So as you can see, there are unique challenges for teenagers coming in for substance abuse treatment. They do have their normal teen development, but they also have some of these things going on that make it difficult to get them motivated to try new things. Now, leaving you on that negative note, let's just take it even further. Let's talk about the adolescent brain, because that's more of their like social, emotional, environmental development, but they also have the baggage of a poorly developed brain that they also have to deal with. So let's kind of dig into that a bit. So just in general, brains are made up of billions of nerve cells, and they do control everything from your heart to how you feel, what you think, and what you do. And these nerves send these electrical signals through your body via these chemicals called neurotransmitters. And some of these neurotransmitters cause satisfaction or pleasure. These are what we call our natural rewards. These are chemicals that make you feel good. And they're kind of coursing throughout all over the place. The bad news is it takes the brain about 25 years to develop. As we've gotten more sophisticated imaging technology and the ability to look at these things, what we found is that it takes a solid 25 years to get to your final adult brain. And as I mentioned, going back, we talked about emerging adults in that 18 to 25 year range. That's why that subcategory has emerged. As we've learned that the brain is still developing into your mid-20s, we realize that even though you turned 18 and everyone's calling you an adult, the fact of the matter is your brain's still developing. So no matter what age you're dealing with, let's say you're dealing with a 15-year-old youth in treatment, it's good to remember they still have a solid 10 years until their brain is fully developed. That's a really long time. That's almost half their life all over again. They have to live and grow and to form this brain to be fully developed. So it's not surprising why those challenges we talked about with normal teen development and teens in treatment, it's not surprising that they're present because their brains are still growing and making connections. Now, the big thing that we look at is the teen brain develops from the back to the front, or anybody's brain. I say teenager, but everybody's brains have developed from the back to the front. And that's very significant because the back is more of kind of like the primitive stuff. That's your physical activity, that's your emotional reactions, that's your motivation and that short-term reward. So that's the stuff that kind of gets you up going in the morning. And from a human development perspective, that makes a lot of sense. As a baby is born, we need them to be up and moving. We need them to form emotional connections with people. We need them to be motivated to eat and experiment so that they can grow. And that's why our brains grow from the back to the front. Unfortunately, what that means is the front, which is our voice of reason, that doesn't really fully form until you're a bit older. So again, if we're dealing with a 15 or 16-year-old, they have a long way to go before that voice of reason has fully developed. And that voice of reason is what helps them manage their impulses and engage in real reasoning activities. So that's just normal teen brain development. Whether they have any outside challenges or not, the reality is their brain is still in that back to front development where they're just more impulsive, because that's what nature needs them to do. And they're quite a few years away from really having great reasoning skills. The issue that we see, though, is drug use slows or prevents that proper brain development. So naturally, it would take 25 years to slowly, as a wave, in a sense, move from the back to the front. When you throw drugs into the mix, you really throw a wrench in that development. And that's why we see a lot of issues coming up with teenagers who abuse substances. And what it'll do is it'll have a serious impact on behavior. So if kids are kind of throwing artificial drugs, in a sense, into the mix, what it's going to do is make it even harder for them to hold back. It's going to make it even harder for them to control their emotions. things that they already do naturally, now it's getting even harder to try to control those. It's going to really accelerate the need for excitement through really low-effort activities. So they kind of get a little less motivated to try more complex things. They just really want to reach that excitement quickly and easily. It further impedes their planning and judgment. And we talked about the issues teens run into in treatment is, not really being motivated by consequences. Well, unfortunately, what happens is the brain slows down a bit, and then they really aren't thinking about consequences. So it just kind of adds fuel to the fire. It's just getting worse. And they become more risky and impulsive. And it's not just a matter of the substance use. It's not just when they're using. It's that it's actually impacting their brain. And now this is becoming more of their day-to-day. They struggle with these things throughout schooling or home life or with their peers. They just have more of these problems across the board, even when they're not using. Now, we talked about those feel-good chemicals. Part of the reason why these issues arise is that you have this neurotransmitter called dopamine, and that's your feel-good chemical. And what it does is it makes sure that we as human beings look for more of what makes us feel good. So we eat something that's good for us, and it makes us feel good, so we want to eat more so we don't starve. It's kind of the body's built-in mechanism to keep us, moving and shaking every day. We need these natural rewards for satisfaction, for pleasure, for relationships, that kind of thing. It's incredibly important that we have those feel-good chemicals in our bodies. What happens, though, is drugs mimic those, and that's a little scary. So when you're using substances, it's going to hijack that dopamine. It's going to overload your body with that chemical. And what happens is you get all these feel-good signals. You're just completely immersed in them. And I mean, that's why people use, because it feels good. What happens, though, is our brain is like, whoa, something's a little off right here. I need to balance this. We need homeostasis. We can't have too much of this chemical. That's not good. So what happens is your brain kind of slows that stuff down, lets less of it through. You don't get as much of those natural chemicals because the drugs have taken the place of them. And then what happens as our brains try to balance all of that, we have less dopamine produced. So we need more and more drugs to feel that same high, and that's where your tolerances come from. So now we have an issue. We have teens that are super motivated by risk and excitement. We have drugs that kind of hijack that mechanism in their brain and make them really motivated to do that. And we have our bodies reacting to that saying, oh, I don't need to make as much of this. So now teens really think they need it. And what happens is it really plays around with this kind of cognitive triad. So I don't know if folks are familiar with this little triangle, but what it does from cognitive behavioral treatments is it talks about how your thoughts impact your feelings, which impact your behavior, and how your behavior impacts your thoughts and your feelings. You can just kind of follow the arrows around and fill in whatever you want. So what will happen is when these drugs hijack that good stuff, it's messing up your feelings, which are going to change your behavior. So maybe you're not feeling so good, so you're like, well, I better smoke some pot, so that's my behavior, and your thought is, I feel better, and it just becomes this vicious circle. So what we see is that when we would typically intervene with maybe some CBT tools or whatever they might be, the drugs are really messing around with that normal thought, feeling, behavior interaction for teens and causes them to make some really poor decisions. So what happens with those thoughts and feelings? Well, that voice of reason that still is not yet developed fully, what little bit they do have is even less influential now. It will take even longer to develop, and they will ignore those consequences even more because everything's getting a little out of balance. And the emotions are going to kind of be accelerated. They're going to become even stronger. They need more excitement. They need more short-term rewards. They have this overactive impulse to seek pleasure because your body is sending you all these mixed messages now. And teens already have all these hormones going on. Now they have drugs interfering with that natural feel-good. So now they're just making kind of poor choices all over the place. And what we end up seeing is a lot of unpredictable and risky behaviors. And sometimes it can be tough to trace that back to drug use. If we aren't familiar with the youth, we don't know that they've been abusing substances and they start acting in an unpredictable, risky manner. These are the things that could be going on for them. So what happens is our teens just misinterpret this feel-good response. They don't have, advanced degrees in addictions treatment. They don't know all about dopamine. They don't know all about that kind of stuff and how smoking pot with my friends every once in a while at the basketball courts is changing my brain chemistry. Like, it's just not something they're worried about. So they just misinterpret that feel-good response they get. And what happens is they just believe that the drugs are improving their psychiatric functioning. It helps me concentrate more. I can study better. We hear that a lot. It helps improve their concentration, their performance. Oh, I'm better on the field when I'm, been popping pills or whatever it might be. The reality is that's just not true. They're being tricked, in a sense, to believing that because that feel-good response that they're getting, that rush of those feel-good chemicals, is making them think that the drugs are doing for them what they want them to do. And it causes them to just want to continue using because they just don't have that knowledge and haven't made that connection that it's fake, it's artificial. They're not actually doing better at things. They're actually doing worse at concentration or performance. But their perception is just the opposite, and it's hard to convince them otherwise. So what happens? How do we move from some experimentation to full-on substance abuse? Well, the first time they use is positive, usually, and they're able to control it. So their brain hasn't gone into overdrive. Their body hasn't had a strong reaction. They just know they had some fun with friends, and it was a good time. Unfortunately, the brain already starts to change. Some of those changes will become permanent, unfortunately. Most are temporary, which is nice, but some are permanent and will become a lifelong challenge for them. And now this initial pleasure they had is replaced by a compulsion. Now they just need the drug to feel normal. Their life starts to revolve around it. They start making more impulsive decisions around that. This tolerance that they start to develop in their body causes an escalation in use. They start using more, they need more, and especially when you pair that with their belief that it is making them better at things, making them better at sports, making them better in the classroom or better studying, it just escalates that even worse. And withdrawal makes it really difficult to quit. It can be physically painful, it can be emotionally painful, it can be socially painful to quit. So there's really low motivation to stop. Now, we all want to feel good. Like that's a pretty common human trait. We just kind of want to have good feelings. And this strive for happiness, what we do is we look for ways to satisfy those needs and desires. It's just a part of life. And doing this in a healthy way is a skill that's still being developed in the teen years. So that's important to note. Like, finding healthy ways to feel good, going to a yoga class, having dinner with some good friends of yours, watching a movie that makes you cry, whatever it might be. Finding ways to achieve happiness in a healthy, productive way is a skill that comes with being an adult. And we know that teens have only just started to scratch the surface of finding healthy ways to feel happy. So when drugs are put into the mix, that's what they think will make them happy. And what then happens is they just move into this negative cycle of their bodies being unable to help them feel good, their minds being unable to help them feel happy, and the drugs kind of become the focus for all of their behaviors because that's the human drive is to feel happy, and for teens that don't know how to do that other ways, the drug use is solving that problem for them. So we talked about teen development a little bit. We talked about their brains. We see that there are some real challenges just inherent in being a teenager, and that once you start using drugs, it really messes up everything that's going on with your development, with your brain development, your emotional development. It becomes a big problem. So, of course, we want kids to stop using drugs. We don't want them to have substance use in their life because of the negative issues. Unfortunately, stopping, it can be really tough. What'll happen is your brain has balanced that dopamine, that feel-good chemical, and once you stop, your brain is going to take a little while to catch up to that, and your dopamine levels are going to stay low for some time. So you're going to not have access to that natural feel-good stuff that you would have had if you hadn't used drugs. So when you stop, you're going to feel down, not so hot. You're going to feel flat. You're unable to feel regular pleasures in your life. And this really reinforces the idea that the drugs are fixing everything, because you feel worse when you stop. And that's particularly true with teenagers who haven't yet developed those natural skills for being happy. What we have is then an issue with them really believing, I have to have those drugs. I have to use those pills or smoke pot. Like, I have to. It's just who I am. Now, luckily, the brain will start to restore itself. It'll get back to those normal levels, but it could take hours, days, months. It depends on how long they've been using, but it can take a long time. So when you're working with teenagers, it's incredibly important to talk through what that recovery period is going to look like, and being really honest about how they're going to feel, so that when it happens, they recognize it and they know it and they realize it to be normal. And we need to normalize that response they're going to have. Like, you're going to swing the other way and you're going to feel far worse before you feel better. And that's just the reality of it. So that's an incredibly important conversation to have, is explaining what impact the drug use has had on your brain, what impact it's had on your ability to find natural happiness, and what it's going to feel like when you stop, because it's going to be rough for a little while. And teens do respond really poorly to this. So when you're kind of predicting and planning for that recovery period, we know they have, like we said, that overactive impulse to seek pleasure. They start feeling down. Their natural teen need is to feel good, so they're going to overreact. That's why we often see a lot of overdoses when kids have stopped using for a while, because that, like I mentioned, that reward system is still being developed. And just naturally, their ability to bounce back to normal is significantly compromised. Just because they haven't developed those skills yet, it's just normal that it's going to be harder to do. So what we'll often see with teens is they want to get back to the drug use as fast as possible to get those good feelings back, because that bounce back to being normal, in a sense, is not usually quick enough for them. Because like we talked about, they're here and now thinkers. They want what they want, and they want it right now. So saying, well, it might take you a good 30 days to start feeling normal again, like that's not going to fly with them all the time. So we really need to do some great skill building during those periods. So what will the withdrawal actually look like for them? What we see with teenagers is it's more of a psychological dependence a lot of the time. Now, I just got done talking about dopamine and all of that kind of stuff. Luckily, teen bodies can rebound pretty quickly. Physical dependence is, of course, possible with regular use. We definitely know that to be true. But what we see with teens is they have a real psychological dependence. They've convinced themselves it's solving their problems and they need it. And what that ends up looking like during that withdrawal period is really intense cravings. They are highly irritable. They're getting really anxious and restless. They're going to report headaches and nausea. They'll have a decrease in appetite and sleep problems. So this is important for them to know, but this is also important for the folks in their life to know. So if you're working with a teen, hopefully there's some level of family involvement, or there's a support for them who can understand that withdrawal is going to make them a little harder to live with for a while. They're going to be a little irritable. They're going to report they don't feel so well. So understanding that that is just natural and unavoidable is important for everybody. And they can take a while. It can be a day. It can be 3 days. Some folks really struggle with withdrawal symptoms for multiple days or weeks. So we just let them know this is a natural phase that you're going to have to go through as your body readjusts, and these are some of the things you're going to feel. Now, compared to adults, teens are far less likely to report withdrawal symptoms. Now, you would think with that long list of unpleasant things that they'd be wanting to tell you all about it and how bad they feel. But what we found is they don't report it. They're not going to tell you about those withdrawal symptoms. And I'm not entirely sure why. It could be that they haven't made the connection between those withdrawal symptoms and the drug use, or the stopping of the drug use. It could be that they don't want to talk about it, but we do know that teens are just less likely to report it, so you have to be more active in looking for it and labeling it for them, that that's what they're going through. And we also know that teens are less able to stop using in spite of physical or mental health problems. Like I mentioned, it's a lot of it's a psychological dependence, so even if they are having physical issues, if they are having mental health concerns as a result of this, that's not as much of a motivator for them to quit as it might be for an adult. We also know that teens are more likely to hide their use. This is not particularly surprising. That's just what teens do with most things, but they're more likely to hide their use. So if you're working with an adolescent client, and hopefully, as I said, you have some kind of family involvement or there's someone in their life who can help monitor them, it's important to educate that person on what to look for, not only with drug use, but also drug withdrawal symptoms, because teens aren't going to report it and they're pretty good at hiding it. But also, teens are more likely to get complaints from others about their use and continue using despite these issues. I think adults maybe can become a little more functional with their substance use. Teens are still emotionally reactive, and then you add drugs into the mix and they can become really reactive. So you will hear more complaints about the behaviors. And unfortunately, that is not a motivator for kids to quit. They will continue using even if it's having a relationship impact, legal issues, fights in their life. That's just not motivating enough to stop using. So what we know is developing brains are more prone to damage. As your brain is growing, it could be damaged. It's much easier to do that. And the drugs and alcohol have lasting harmful effects on health. There's a lot of stuff out there where people talk about the legalization of marijuana and how, it's fine, or, these different things are fine. There's a lot of attempts to normalize substance use, and maybe we'll find that that's true for adults. But what we know is when you have a developing brain, if you throw outside stuff into it like that, it is going to have a damaging effect. So no matter how much teens talk about, these drugs are legal now, that means they're safe. Okay, well, we'll talk to you again when you turn 25, technically. But right now, as a teenager, your brain is still growing. You're a solid decade away from having it fully developed, and we absolutely know that those drugs will damage that development. So in the short term, what does that damage look like? Short-term effects, as long as the drug is in your system, this is what it's going to look like. It'll impact your short-term memory, and impair your ability to form new memories. So that green box just kind of talks about memory development. So while you're using, you're going to really struggle to form and retain new memories. That's going to be a notable thing. The dark blue box in the top right talks about just your general ability to function. You will be less motivated. You will be less mentally flexible. So if you're a kid who's using drugs on the way to school, it's going to be even harder to be able to learn and understand things because that flexibility has been impaired problem solving, and impaired focus. So we know those to be true. Now, like I said, kids will report that the drugs have made them better at everything, but what we do know is that when they've been using, while it's in their system, this is the impact it's actually having on them, despite their perceptions that things are better. It'll also, in the bottom left box, impact their physical abilities, disrupted coordination and balance. They have less ability to do complicated tasks, such as athletics or driving. They have a slower reaction time. So they may feel, when I was working outpatient, I would have kids talk about, if I smoke pot before practice, I'm like so much better because I'm relaxed and I can really, take risks and do these things. Like, well, that's what you think. That's your perception. But an outside observer is going to see that you don't have as much coordination and balance. It's harder for you to do complicated tasks, and you have a slower reaction time. And the last one is just mental health concerns. They will show more anxiety and more paranoia. Now, I just got a great question that, are these side effects and withdrawal symptoms and results the same for the THC extract? That's a fantastic question. Yes, they will be. There are some differences, and there hasn't been as much research done on all of the individual extracts. But yes, you will definitely see these same things across the board with whatever they're using. Yep, that's a great question. Thank you. So those are short-term effects. So while it's in your system, it's making you clumsy, it's making you struggle. The long-term effects are that you will have persistent deficits in short-term memory. So that means that you will forever struggle to form short-term memories. And what happens when your brain works is you kind of put it in your short-term working memory, and then it moves into your long-term memory. If you're struggling to keep it in your short-term memory, it's going to struggle to get into your long-term memory. And over time, when you use it too long, it will permanently alter those other neurotransmitters specifically associated with anxiety and mood disorders. So you are more susceptible to mood disorders and panic attacks through long-term use because it has permanently altered those natural chemicals you have. You also continue to have long-term struggles with functioning, focus, mental flexibility. So long-term use is going to have these issues. We are seeing some new research coming out linking chronic drug use to increased risk of schizophrenia. We know that schizophrenia often emerges, as around the age 18 as you're moving into adulthood, and the concerns are that the substance use is affecting the emerging brain and making you more at risk of developing schizophrenia, or if it's something that's already a risk factor in your family, elevating that risk with the drug use. It will have an effect on your immune system too, so you'll be getting sick more. We have seen also decreased IQ. 8 points is a giant number to lose because of substance use. And fertility issues, not something teens are necessarily concerned about, but something they might be really worried about is they want to start a family. The long-term effects could impact them. Great. So, and then finally, there can be actual brain damage in just the actual image of the brain, a smaller hippocampus, a smaller amygdala, and that permanently impairs formation of memory and emotion regulation. So what we see is that adults who've had long-term drug use that started when they're adolescents and their brain was developing, they forever struggle with that emotion regulation. They're more apt to react in an angry manner towards something. They struggle more with frustration, makes it harder to have long-term relationships and harder to be successful at your job if you can't control those things. And it's due to actual damage that happened at the brain level that is unfortunately irreversible. And then finally, impact on life. What does it mean when these things happen to you, when you've been using drugs and it's permanently altered your brain and it's changed how things happen? Well, what we've seen in longitudinal studies is kids that have struggled with addiction who've had these impacts, there's lower income potential, they're more likely to be unemployed, they have decreased cognitive abilities, so think about that as they move towards going to college or maybe into a professional career and they're wanting to go for some kind of licensure or they're trying to promote themselves in some way. They might have long-term cognitive abilities, increased mental health concerns across the board, physical health issues, lower satisfaction with life, memory loss, and in the educational standpoint, less likely to graduate from high school or college, and overall just less likely to enroll in college. So it's a pretty profound impact for something that lots of people call, kids being kids and experimenting. If it really moves to that point where it's more of a drug abuse and we start to see these profound changes, it will impact their life for the long term, and that's pretty scary stuff. Now, there are some things that increase risk. So the earlier a teen begins to use, the more likely they'll have serious abuse. So, if they start using at 12 or 13, we're going to see even more of an impact on the developing brain. It's going to aggravate any mental health concerns or mental illness that's already present. It's going to intensify unstable family relationships. So family relations are going to be really, really impacted. And it increases exposure to physical or sexual abuse. That's a really big one. So the earlier they're using, the risk goes up much, much higher. So early abuse is definitely something we want to prioritize for treatment. Is if kids are young, if you get a referral for a kid that's young and been using drugs, we know that the trajectory is far, far worse. And that they're more likely to have these bad life experiences, more stress. Their impulsivity will remain at a teen level. They'll show more aggression. They'll have lack of nurturing tendencies and school stresses. So we want to get in there early if we do see kids starting to use and not just think of it as a normal teen experimentation, because we know early use really, really sets the tone for their long-term success. So as we've looked at that, what does it look like to manage life without drugs? And obviously this could become a whole, half day, full day training on its own. But what we'd like to tell folks is those first hours, days, and months are critical. So while you're working with a teen in treatment, obviously you're going to be looking at their triggers, you're going to be figuring out what's causing the substance use. But those first hours are super critical. Those dopamine levels have to take time to return to what we call pre-drug levels. We have to be really aware of how they're going to feel down and flat and unable to feel regular pleasure. So we want to look at how are they going to manage that feeling? How are they going to manage feeling down? If they already have a tendency towards depression or mood disorders, this is going to exacerbate that. So what can we do to set them up for success, to keep them, kind of fighting through that period of feeling down? How will they manage and understand why they feel so flat? I mean, that's not a fun feeling for a kid to just feel flat and have no emotion. So explaining what that means, how that's going to feel, and coming up with activities and things to help offset that. And a big one is activities to bring pleasure are important. We want to start filling their life back with positive things. Physical activity is the easiest to combat that lack of pleasure. It's going to help kind of accelerate getting those chemicals back in order. So getting them active with something is very important. We're not going to cover it in today's talk of treatments, but there is a treatment called behavioral activation that is kind of a cognitive behavioral approach towards these kinds of things, and it has great strategies for getting someone motivated to get up and moving and doing things. And in our practice, we pull those in quite a bit when we're getting to the point where we know the teens' withdrawal from drugs and their post-drug life is going to be tough for them as they manage these feelings. We can pull in those behavioral activation activities to keep them motivated and moving forward. So effective treatments do exist. So I always am concerned the beginning of the presentation is always such a downer. It's like, wow, teens have a lot of struggles. It's hard to work with them. Their brains are a mess. Oh boy, and if they stop using, they're going to fall apart. It's not a fun message, but the exciting thing is that we do have treatments that work. And evidence-based is a term that gets thrown around a lot, but what it means is there's been some scientific testing of this treatment, and it's been found to be effective. And in the green box on the right, what we have is kind of a checklist of things you want to look for to determine if the treatment's going to be effective. So an effective treatment for teen substance use obviously has to be developmentally appropriate. I say that, but it's very common to see adaptations of adult treatments without making changes to respond to the adolescents and their unique social emotional needs. So it has to be developmentally appropriate. The most effective treatments have CBT. They have cognitive behavioral therapy approaches built into them or as a standalone. So CBT is incredibly important. Next is behavioral therapy. You want a behavioral component, and we're going to talk about these in the second half. You want some kind of rewards to enhance motivation. That's super important with teenagers who are real impulsive and here and now thinkers. We got to get them moving and shaking. And family involvement is necessary. Most treatment adolescents receive is individual. It's hard to find treatments that are family treatments for adolescents, but we know from the data that those are the most effective approaches when you want to treat adolescent substance use. You have to get those family members involved. So we're coming up to almost 1 o'clock. So what I want to do is introduce Rachel, and then we'll take a break. So Rachel is the teenager we're going to follow through the final half of this presentation today, and we're going to look at her issues and challenges through the lens of the different treatments that are available. So let me just introduce you guys to Rachel, and she is a real kid that we've worked with, so this is pretty spot on. So she is a 16-year-old female. She's had alcohol abuse and marijuana use. Her mother and father have been participating in sessions. So that's kind of her drugs of choice, and family involvement has been pretty good. She does present with quite a few problems at school, mainly with her academics. Her parents have pretty high expectations about how she should be doing and what her grades should look like, and it's causing problems at school with getting the work done, studying, anxiety, things like that. So she started drinking before school and while studying. What she reported is it helped her calm down and manage anxiety. So she kind of found that drinking was her solution to dealing with her problems in school. But that drinking really escalates heavily when she's with her friends, and then she starts smoking some pot too as well when she's with them. But that's more of just a social thing she does. The drinking is the big issue. She was caught drinking and driving and was referred to court. She has a formal DUI and lost her license for quite a few months. And her mom reported to us that Rachel would often come home drunk and would be sick from drinking, so, hungover in a sense. And this led to really intensive arguments at home to the point that she and mom just stopped talking to each other and she stayed in her room. It got to the point where just the fights were too much and they just separated and basically stopped talking to each other. Now, she has been in treatment for a while, and the drinking has decreased and the drug use has stopped, which is very exciting. And what the therapist that worked with Rachel did a lot of tools for managing anxiety. They did some journaling, they used breathing techniques, they used coping cards. They really saw that the anxiety around academic performance and conflict at home was the biggest driver, excuse me, for the drinking. And so they really wanted to go after that and felt that if we can target that big trigger, we might have a positive impact on the other use. They also addressed the family conflict in session. They worked on communication, yelling. They worked on just those general family relationships. They also tackled some of the school stuff. They did a little bit of work with school organization and study skills, hoping that, if Rachel felt she had a better set of tools for managing her school performance, she might be able to better manage her anxiety. And mom has increased her monitoring at home. What we learned was that mom and dad didn't necessarily know where she was. They weren't aware that she was hiding, bottles of alcohol in her room. So we worked on the importance of monitoring as well. Okay, so that is our good buddy Rachel. So she is the one that we're going to kind of follow as we go through the treatment. So the second half, we're going to talk through a few treatments and how they would approach the different issues that this teenager runs into. So we can go ahead and take our break now if you guys want. And I saw a bunch of questions pop up. So I'm going to look at those and we'll address them when we get back, if that sounds good.
Thank you, Jamie. That sounds great. And we will reconvene at 1:05. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. It's 1:05, and Jaime, if you're ready, you can continue.
Okay, great. So I just want to jump on a couple questions real quick. Someone asked that if you're telling a teen it takes 25 years for the brain to develop, what if they say, well, then I'll just wait till I'm 25 to start using drugs? Will I have less damage to my brain? That's a very insightful teenager. So what I would explain is that, yeah, technically speaking, you will have less of that actual organic brain damage as your brain is developing, as you would when your brain is developing. However, we do know that some, depending on what drugs you use, some drugs will continue to cause damage to your brain. So it's not really worth the risk to experiment. But whether it causes damage to your brain or not, it still is having that same impact on you as far as ability to focus, ability to make good decisions. It still impacts your coordination and your physical, athleticism. So it still has all those same effects. It's not necessarily going to, do that chronic brain damage that you would see during a developing brain, but you still are at high risk of brain damage and having all those other side effects as well. And I did have a quick follow-up on the THC extracts. The question was, are the withdrawal symptoms worse? So it really depends. What we see a lot with the extracts is they can be a little bit more potent, but they can take a little longer to react. So teens will often take more of it than they should. Not that they should take any of it, but to reach that high, they may think that they need more of it. So they take more because the high might take longer to achieve, or it might be a different kind of feeling. So that's what we see more of, is that they use more, and if they use more, the withdrawal symptoms will be a little escalated a bit. But the withdrawal symptoms are pretty consistent across, the different kinds of marijuana options on the market these days. It's just how much risk there is that they're going to overdose, use more than they should, and that will impact their ability to kind of, succeed in their recovery. Okay, great. Thank you guys for the questions. So what we have in the second half is we're going to look at 3 different treatment options that are available. These are evidence-based treatments, and they all come at addiction from slightly different ways, but what you're going to see is that there's a lot of consistency. So what we talked about in that little, it looks too far back, that little green box of the things that you need to be effective, you're going to see that those are present in all of these. So the first one is contingency management for youth addiction. This is the program that I work with. So I definitely, am the most aware of what goes on with this treatment. CM is one of the most highly researched treatments on the market, so you will see a lot of it. If you just kind of Google it, it'll be everywhere. So it is an evidence-based outpatient family treatment for substance use, and it brings together behavioral and cognitive behavioral principles. So it's kind of the mashing together of those 2 approaches in this treatment model. And the idea of CM is that to help someone move towards abstinence, we need to fight the powerful pull of the drugs with immediate rewards for not using. So as we talked about earlier, the consequences of drug use are often not particularly meaningful because they aren't immediate and they aren't powerful. Worrying about what your probation officer might do a week from now when you have to check in with them is not usually enough of a motivator to change your behavior when you're at the party and getting pressure. So in CM, we say that's a powerful pull. Using drugs is very rewarding. We need to find a reward for not using. And what we found is that if you can offer these kind of planned incentives, these rewards linked to not using, teens will overcome their ambivalence about the drug use. They'll speed up their recovery while we wait for their natural rewards to take hold. And those natural rewards are things in their environment, but also, getting their brain back in action. So that's kind of what the idea of CM is we have to reward better decisions immediately. And the principles behind it are the idea that with drug use, there are natural consequences of using. So it impacts you personally, it can impact your family, your legal status, your educational achievements, and your social achievements. But those natural consequences are delayed and not always obvious. So teens aren't necessarily making the connection between mom getting mad at me whenever I come home and my drug use. They're not making those connections. The rewards for using are very powerful. There's social rewards, physical, emotional, and those aren't immediate and tangible. So I'm hanging out with a bunch of friends. I'm feeling a little peer pressure to smoke. I do. We have a great time. I feel like I'm part of the crowd. Physically I feel good. That's very rewarding. And it is super, super easy to connect that reward to the drug use because they are almost on top of each other. So you have consequences that are very delayed and hard to connect to the drug use, and you have rewards that are super, super obvious and directly linked to the drug use. And then as we talked about with withdrawal, the consequences of not using are often very powerful. So let's say, this is my social life is I hang with the kids who use, I use with them, I think it makes me feel good, I could deal with my stresses at home better. Now I'm being told I have to stop. I could get rejected by those peers. I'm going to start immediately feeling those withdrawal symptoms. And those consequences of not using are very immediate and tangible as well. Like your buddy texts you to hang out and you're like, no, they might immediately move on to somebody else. So in contingency management, what we look at is those what we call contingencies around the drug use. And what we see is that everything is stacked against the teen to stop using. It's very rewarding. Under all behavioral principles, that reward is very powerful because it's immediate, and stopping can be very punishing. So what does that mean in treatment then if we conceptualize drug use in that manner? Well, what we say is if I use drugs, it's immediately rewarding. If I refuse, it could be punishing. Those consequences you keep talking to me about are meaningless. They don't mean anything to me right now. So obviously the deck is stacked towards using. If I don't use drugs, the rewards for not using are not immediate. I'm not going to feel better soon. I'm not going to, immediately realize my greater success in college 5 years from now. So those rewards you keep talking about why I should stop, that doesn't mean a lot to me right now. And the consequences are immediate through those things we talked about. So in the moment when kids are feeling pressure to use, what are they going to do? Well, they're most likely going to go back to the drug use because everything is stacked against them for quitting. Using is the easier path. So with that idea in mind, what the research around contingency management has said, we need to reinforce behaviors that are contrary to the drug use. We need to flip that bad equation on its head. Because we know from behavioral research, if a behavior is reinforced or rewarded, it's more likely to occur. So in the CM treatment model, you develop this reward plan with the youth, where if they have a negative screen, they get a reward. If they use a new skill around peer refusal, other study skills that help them better manage their anxiety, like our kid Rachel we talked about, you get a reward. Or if you engage in a drug-interfering behavior, as we call it, you get a reward. And a drug-interfering activity is anything that you would do where you can't do drugs. So maybe it's, helping your grandma clean her china cabinet. You're not as likely to smoke pot while doing that as you would hanging on the basketball court with your friends. So we try to stack up those drug-interfering positive activities and reward them for choosing to do those instead. And then we try to better link consequences to the drug use. So the family environment, the immediate environment takes over, and if there's a positive drug screen, they then get a consequence. So we really try to stack a lot of rewards on refusing to do drugs and changing your behaviors around drug use to make that a more desirable route to take. And what does the research say? Well, and this is true for all the treatments we're going to talk about today, treatments that use rewards and positive reinforcement that have that real positive environment around them have better outcomes, they're more therapeutic, and they're just more enjoyable for the consumers, the clients that you work with, and for staff. We see that across the board. And treatments that are more negative, that are more punishing, so they're largely ineffective, they're unpleasant, and they've been linked to higher rates of dropout and resistance. So the more confrontational styles have just been shown that they aren't as effective. So what you'll see across all these treatments, CM and the next two we'll talk about, is just better outcomes because they have that more positive and reward-based approach. So what CM says is we know recovery is a long journey. We want to tip that balance by giving the team positive reasons to make those next steps. We want to reward them for facing that challenge they have and overcoming it. And just very briefly, what you'd see in this model is there's 4 modules. We determine need and assess impact. We try to figure out how the drug use is affecting their life. We do an ABC assessment, which is basically figuring out what the triggers are, what the consequences are. We come up with in a sense, a point and level system. This is how they access the rewards. And then we develop our self-management plan, and that's how do we manage our triggers. In Rachel's case, how do we handle the anxiety that she's dealing with? And that's all based on that ABC assessment, where we really dig into the drug use and figure out what's triggering the use, what's maintaining the use, and how can we reward different approaches. So, as I mentioned, it is an outpatient family treatment. Family is heavily involved. It's for ages 12 to 17. It's about 14 to 18 sessions is what we typically see. Most of those are family sessions. The therapists do kind of work through the modules to move through the CM treatment. It is manualized in the sense that you do receive a lot of resources and worksheets you can use with clients, things like that. And there is a full quality assurance system and consultation around it. So you do have access to a consultant who could answer questions, provide resources, that kind of thing. And that's something you'll see with all the evidence-based treatments. There is a 2-year certification process in CM. It starts with an initial 15-hour online training that you do with a trainer, kind of like this, but one-on-one. You do get ongoing consultation, webinars, session tape reviews, client surveys, little mini boosters, and some provider networking where you share resources. There is that QA monitoring where we look at fidelity to the model, make sure you guys have the tools you need to be able to use the interventions as they were designed. And an 8-hour in-person training is in year 2, and it shows the cost and the link for that training. So that is one approach to teen substance use, is contingency management. The idea that we want to bring, someone just said the audio just stopped. Can folks let me know if you hear in a little chat?
Jaime, I can hear you fine.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's talk about Rachel then. So I did have a little video here, but it's not going to pop through, unfortunately, but that's okay because we could talk through it. So what happened with Rachel then is you were working with her for a while, working with the family, doing those things we talked about, anxiety management, school prep, family conflict. Things were going great. And then one Friday evening, she decided, it was after exams, and she decided she was just going to go out with some friends, ended up at a friend's house. They were drinking. She smoked a little pot. She decided she had to stay over because she had driven there, and she didn't want to get another DUI. She stayed over, ended up going back home the next day, hid in her room all day. Parents were angry, and it all just kind of felt like the first session all over again. So it was a pretty big step back for the family to see her kind of go out on a Friday and just really celebrate the fact that she was done with finals and, in a sense, reward herself in her mind for what she did. So that is the situation that was encountered. So as a CM therapist, if you're trained in that particular model, you would approach it in a interesting way. So what you would do is you would look at the drug use. She would have a drug screen. We would have some pretty clear evidence if she had used or not. And in CM, what that would mean is she would have a consequence. And for Rachel, it meant that she could not access her car. That was the consequence they had, because if she couldn't remain sober, obviously she wasn't safe to drive, so she was going to lose the car. And she couldn't access the rewards. And for her, it was working towards some minutes on her phone. So she would immediately feel the power of her decision with the rewards plan that was in place. Then they would approach the self-management planning and say, what fell apart? So we had plans in place that have been working for you for a while. We've worked on peer refusal skills. We've worked on study skills and how to effectively manage your anxiety, and it all seemed to fall apart, so we missed something. So you would all pull out your self-management plan and go through it and figure out what fell apart, what happened, or what was different about that Friday night. Was it which teenager friend asked you to come to the party? Is it somebody who's particularly hard to say no to? Was it that you were concerned about going home and getting grilled by your parents about how you did in finals? You know, maybe that was what the trigger was. And we'd really dig into those kind of ABCs and those self-management plans to figure out what fell apart, and we'd revise it. And then we'd establish rewards going forward from there. So as a CM therapist, that's kind of the approach that you would take, is ensuring she kind of felt the pain of it, she got the consequence, and she lost the reward, showing her what path she'd need to take to get back on track, and then figuring out what fell apart, what was missed that led to this little slip in treatment, and how can we avoid that going forward. Okay, so cognitive behavioral therapy is, as I said, the best supported treatment for substance use, and CBT is very widely used. I bet a lot of folks here use it or are familiar with it. So in cognitive behavioral therapy approach, what you're thinking about is that there's this theory that learning processes play a critical role in the development of problem behaviors like drug abuse. So remember that cognitive triad we had, the thoughts, the feelings, the behaviors? You'd probably have a copy of that on your wall if you were using CBT treatment, because we would be looking at the interactions of how you thought and how that impacts your feelings and what that causes you to do with your behaviors. So what we want to do in CBT is teach participants how to anticipate problems and help them develop effective coping strategies. So what are your high-risk situations going to look like? What are your triggers looking like? What are coping strategies you can use to manage those high-risk situations and those negative thoughts you might have or negative feelings you might have? In CBT with adolescents, what you really dig into with them specifically is exploring the positive and negative consequences of using drugs. As we talked about way back an hour ago, you know, teens really struggle with that cause and effect relationship. So with CBT, you want to spend a lot of time making those connections with them and showing them that, yeah, it might have taken a week for your PO to catch you in a sense using drugs, but this is what happened with that. These were the ramifications of that decision, and let's look at it. Let's look at times you didn't use and what were some positive things around that. So you really want to explore that. You really want to work with teens on how to monitor their feelings and their thoughts. What do they think about the substance use? How do they feel about it? Like we talked about, they have this misperception that it helps them do better and feel better and achieve more. So let's look at that kind of triad in a sense and figure out, are you thinking and believing that this is solving your problems, and how does that drive your feelings about the drug use, which then causes you to do more behaviors around drug use. We also want to look, and relatedly, look at that distorted thinking patterns and those cues, figuring out what are their misbeliefs about the drug use and the positive impact it's having on their life. And then spending a lot of time looking for high-risk situations. Like we talked about, teens struggle with predicting and planning, so we really need to do it for them. We need to help them figure out, where are you most likely to run into your triggers? Where are you most likely to have a slip up? With who, when? Is it a certain time of day, day of the week, time of the year? Is it related to holidays? What are those high-risk situations, and how can you best manage them? And we do that through a lot of self-control skills, so emotion regulation, anger management, just some practical problem solving, some substance refusal. And this could be outpatient, individual, group, residential. You can really use CBT tools such as that across the board. So since CBT is more of a broad thing, what I thought I would do is just introduce some tools that we use in CM that are CBT components that you can kind of take home today as things to use. So there are three that are very common in the approaches we take. We call the first one the SODA's problem solving, then there's the cost benefit and the coping cards. So in the tabs at the top, you should be able to access those. So we're going to start with the SODAs, and I think, yep, that is handout number 4. Can folks, I'm hoping, see that on the screen? So the SODAs method is probably my most favorite worksheet I've ever used with any clients. It stands for situation, options, disadvantages and advantages, and solution. And it's just a really, really concrete way for a teenager or anyone to think through a problem. And the second page of this gives you the instructions, so you'll have that as well. But what you do with this is the first S is the situation. So you'd write down what's the situation. For Rachel, our example client, the situation was, running into peers in the parking lot or having a friend invite me to a party. So you'd write that down. That's the situation we're dealing with right now. And then the O is options. So we talk with the teen, what are some options for dealing with that situation? Let's come up with 3. And we always come up with 3 because most people can come up with 2. And when you push for 3, you can get some more creative options. It's just a nice way to kind of push the limits a bit and see if you can come up with something solid. So we'd look at the situation, we'd say, what are 3 options for dealing with that? You could just ignore your friend and walk away. You could say, sure, I'll come to the party. Or you could come up with a reason why you can't. Oh, my mom needs me tonight. We're cleaning the garage or something. I have no idea. So you want to come up with some options, and you don't want to be afraid to have the teenager give you a bad option. If the situation is they want to run away, and option 1 they say is, I'm just going to run away, like that's okay. We need to write that down because it's an actual option that they're trying to weigh in their mind. So we don't want to just write down good options. We want to write down all options. So we come up with our 3. And then the disadvantages is the D, and the advantages is the A. And as you'll see, it's divided by 1, 2, and 3. And under 1, 2, and 3, you see A, B, C. So what we do is we take each option. So option 1, let's say, is to just ignore my friend and get in my car. We'd go down to the D section, and we'd say, okay, what are some of the disadvantages of making that choice, of just pretending your friend doesn't exist and getting in your car? What are some of the disadvantages you might run into in making that decision? Let's come up with 3. And then we'd move on to the next option. The option is, telling them I have to help my mom with the garage. Well, what are some disadvantages of using that reason to avoid the party? And we'd work through those disadvantages to really see how painful is it going to be to make that choice. Then we take each option and we approach it again under the A, which is the advantages. And we say, well, what are the advantages of just ignoring your friend and getting in the car? Let's talk about those. Well, then I won't end up at the party drunk. Yeah, that would be an advantage. And we go through each of the 3 options and look for 3 advantages. Once we've kind of done all the legwork and really digging into the situation and our options, we come up with our solution. That's how we wrap it up. And we say, all right, we've looked at the situation. We've come up with some options on how to handle it. We've really looked at the advantages and disadvantages. What's the solution? Which one do you want to do? And then we ask them to rate it on how difficult it is and how likely they are to use it. Because the solution might be, I should just walk away from my friend and not go to the party. And that one seems to have the best advantage. On a scale of 1 to 5, though, it might be a 5. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find teenagers who will just ignore their friends and walk away. So they might rate it a 5, and they're going to rate it as a 5 is not at all likely I'm going to do it. So then we need to revisit our options. So once we iron out a solution that is not overly difficult and that they would be most likely to use, we can't leave it there. Because like we talked about, teens are still developing skills. We now need to talk about the skills. How in the world are you going to do it? So if we decide that even though it's hard, you're still going to walk away from your friend in the parking lot before you get tempted, what are the actual concrete skills you're going to need to have in order to be able to do that? What's it going to look like? Can you pretend to be on your phone while you're doing it so you look occupied and you can just say a couple days later, I didn't even hear you, I didn't know. What are some things they're going to have to actually do? So that's the SOTAS method. It's one we use in a bunch of the different treatments. It can be pretty fun for the kids to use. Next is the cost benefit, pretty similar, and you'll see that all these tools are pretty similar. Cost benefit is really just what are the costs of continuing to do what I'm doing and what are the benefits of continuing to do what I'm doing. And this is just a simple worksheet for that. So continue my marijuana use, the same as always. Okay, that's what you're saying you want to do. Well, what are the advantages of that and what are the disadvantages? And as a clinician, this is a great opportunity for you to jump in and educate them about some cons that they may not be aware of around the impact the drugs have on them, your observations on the impact the drug use has had on their life. You can help introduce some cons into that equation. And then once we look at that, you can say, well, let's talk about if we were going to change it. If you're going to change your marijuana use by, let's see, going to the gym instead when you feel that you're getting stressed at home, when you would usually smoke. What are the pros of that and what are the cons? So I just heard some weird beeping, so I apologize if folks can't hear me. Shout out, but hopefully it's still working. So that's the cost-benefit analysis. That's kind of a fun one as well. And then the final one is coping cards. So we talked a lot about teaching kids coping strategies and ways to deal with different stressors that they're running into, and this is one way that they can do that. They can use these coping cards to identify what are your automatic thoughts. So what are your thoughts around the drug use? Lots of kids will tell us that, I'm stupid, I can't do this. And then what's a more adaptive response? What's a better way that you can deal with those automatic thoughts that you're having? So these are just some examples of that you'll see on there. But that can be a fun little exercise for teens to do as well, that while you're working with them in services, if you're starting to see that they have really negative thoughts, dealing with them in a kind of a coping card kind of way can be helpful. It can be something they can keep on their person. Lots of kids with smartphones now, they'll take a picture of it, the card, and keep it in their phone. If they encounter the situation where they have those negative thoughts, they can look at what a more adaptive thought is. So that's just another tool that they have that you can use. Whoops, sorry. So we went through those. Now, in Rachel's situation, what would we do? So if we were going to take a CBT approach with Rachel, we would use probably a lot of those tools with her. We would look at the situation. We would figure out what are some better options she could have taken instead of going to her friend's house and drinking and smoking marijuana. The interesting thing about Rachel is we were actually able to review the session tape for her and hear kind of how the evening played out. And what we saw was that when she got to the party, she didn't immediately start drinking. She kind of just socialized and hung out with people. And as she reported it, I just kept getting, people just kept telling me, why aren't you drinking? You're more fun when you drink. And they just started piling the peer pressure on her. So what we saw with her is that was one of the biggest issues she ran into, was just dealing with the peer pressure. But the positive was that she went to the party and was able to not drink for a pretty good amount of time. So what we would do is we might use a soda to look at that situation and figure out positives and negatives. So the situation was she did use, and what are some other things we could have done. But there was also a positive situation where she went to the party and was able to kind of peer refuse for a pretty good amount of time. And why did she do that? And we might deconstruct that as well to really reinforce for her that she was making good decisions and figure out what made it hard for her to stick to that good decision. So that's what we might look at in Rachel's situation for the party that she was at. And then the final treatment that has a lot of support in substance use is brief strategic family therapy. So we'll kind of touch on that. So it is an evidence-based, short-term, very structured, problem-focused approach to intervention and treatment. It's very much targeted at the families and the problematic behaviors that are going on in the home, which also include the drug use. It can also target things like delinquency, negative peers, unsafe sexual activity, any maladaptive family interactions. It's pretty comprehensive in being able to look at those family systems and the issues that folks are running into. It is based on some assumptions. The assumptions are that family-based interactions strongly influence how children behave. So the belief is that what goes on in the family between the members of the family will have an effect on that child's behavior and their ability to stop behaviors and learn new behaviors. You are targeting and improving maladaptive family interactions. The goal of that is that if these maladaptive interactions, these problematic things going on between parent and child and parent, are causing problems. If we can reduce them, we can reduce the symptomatic behaviors, the problems the child's presenting with. It pulls in that cognitive, as I talked about, and that behavioral, and the affective aspects of family life, so the warmth and the relations and things like that. So as you can see, there's the CBT stuff coming through that as well, and the family component is super important. It is a family treatment. It can be applied in a variety of settings, outpatient, residential, day treatment, aftercare. It can kind of be all over the place. Slightly younger age range for starting than CM, ages 6 to 17. It's about 8 to 24 sessions, so there's quite a few. Most are family again. And you really use an integrative model. So if you're the kind of practitioner who really likes pulling in a lot of different things, really integrating stuff, you probably would enjoy this approach. Uses a lot of structural family therapy, a lot of strategic family therapy. And both of those approaches are really interesting in that they look at family interactions and they look at the family's ability to, adapt and change along with the child. It brings in that CBT and those ecosystems approaches. So what's going on in the ecology, what's going on in their natural environment. Again, it is manualized to help with training, and it does have a quality assurance system as well, so similar to the CM model. And the goals of BSFT are to change family dynamics, patterns, and interactions. And it's based on the principles of family systems. So we want to look at the family system and figure out what's going on at the family level. We want to look at those patterns of interaction. Is there one pattern of interaction that continues to repeat? One thing we saw with Rachel was that most of the conflict around school was between her and her father. He was really hard on her with achieving school, achieving her goals, getting to a good college, that kind of thing, and it really stressed her out. Her and her mom had more of an emotional relationship, and that's where a lot of the stresses would come out with the arguing and the fighting and the refusing to talk. So they had slightly different patterns of interaction in the home, which was interesting. And you use that to plan the interventions once you've determined those interaction patterns. And what this treatment will do for you as a practitioner is it's really going to provide you with a great tool to improve family involvement in therapy. Since it is such a strong family therapy treatment, it will help engaging families in treatment, which we know if we engage the families in treatment, we're going to have longer success. There also is increased retention, so people will stay in treatment longer. And there are reductions in adolescent drug use and related risk-taking behaviors. So you can really foster kind of healthy development with this approach, which is really nice to see. There is a certification process as well. There's an initial training program with workshops and supervised practicum. It's on site. Then there's kind of a master's trainer component that does demonstrations and case consultation. You do get 4 to 6 months of supervision after the training until you receive the certification, and that's through phone and video review of sessions. Certification is required for the first 3 years, and then you can do kind of a recertification every 2 years. There is monthly adherence monitoring, and the link is below to learn more about it. So very similar, and that's something that you'll see with evidence-based treatments across the board is this quality assurance training model is pretty consistent across all of them. Most of them have maybe a certification process or some really concrete required training that needs to be done. And there is follow-up to answer questions, do consultation, make sure that it's clear how to implement the interventions, how to overcome barriers to implementation. So you will see that across the board. And it really, I did multi-systemic therapy for 12 years, and we had a very strong consultation model. And it was just nice to know that when you most of the time, you're pretty confident in what you're doing, and that time when you run into an issue and you're not sure, it's nice to have that consultant whose job is to kind of step back, assess the situation, and give you some feedback in an objective way when you've been so immersed in what's going on with the family. So if we were a BSFT therapist, how would we approach Rachel's situation? Well, most likely what we would look at first is why did she not want to go home? So what got in the way of her wanting to go home? We know that school is a big trigger. School performance is a big trigger. She just had finals, and she decided it would be far better to go and get drunk and high with her friends than to go home. So we'd be curious about that. Were there concerns about how her parents would react? Was there something her parents had said to her before she went to school that day that led her to believe going home wasn't going to be fun? You know, you better do well in these exams, you better have studied, whatever it might be. So we'd really try to dig into that family interaction piece first and see if those were driving any of the reasons why she chose to go out with her friends and drink and smoke pot and that kind of thing. And then we'd look at what happened the next day when she did come home. How was she received? What happened when the parents realized what had gone on? Was there any conflict following that we need to work on? So we'd really be looking at that family systems approach and seeing if there was anything about the family system that caused her to make that choice. And then we'd be looking at, you know, the actual choices she made. So we'd look at that part first, probably. So before we get to the last part, just to kind of summarize those 3 treatments, what you'll see is they're very developmentally appropriate. They're meeting the kids where they're at, saying that we understand how teens make decisions, we understand the importance of family, we understand the family interactions are incredibly powerful. So developmentally, all the approaches are very appropriate for meeting kids where they're at. They all have a very strong CBT component and a behavioral component and a family component. Those are the 3 things that are kind of the magic recipe for having success with adolescent substance abuse treatment. Is you have to look at the thoughts and feelings, you have to look at the behaviors around the drug use, and we need to get some family involvement in the treatment and then the long-term success. So it's pretty consistent across the board. So it sounds like, oh, I want to do these treatments. I have to go through the certification process. I have to have consultation. Like, that can't be free. It sounds kind of pricey. Well, we want to invest in those effective treatments because what we know is, according to National Institutes of Health, substance abuse costs over $600 billion annually. I'm sure that number has gone up considerably with the opioid epidemic and all the issues we're dealing with that. But it's an astronomical cost to our country and our communities to have chronic substance use. And we know that treatment can reduce these costs. If we can get an effective treatment in, we can actually realize a return on investment. And what the numbers have shown us is that every dollar invested in addiction treatment programs yields a return of between $4 and $7 in reduced crime, criminal justice costs, and theft. So you're going to save $4 to $7 for every dollar you invest. If you factor in healthcare costs to that, the ratio is actually 12 to 1. So when you start talking about issues people have with their physical health and all the HIV, STDs, that kind of thing that are often linked to substance use, the savings become much, much better. And the savings that we see stem from a couple of things. Individuals who are helped through these treatment programs are going to have fewer interpersonal conflicts, greater workplace productivity, fewer drug-related accidents, and that includes overdoses and deaths. So not only are we seeing a financial benefit, but we're seeing a benefit to the community as a whole because folks are just better able to be successful in communities if they haven't had addiction issues that they're dealing with. So actually we're wrapping up a bit early, so we will have some time for questions, which is really nice. So overall, the take-home points are that adolescents have unique developmental needs. So we can't use traditional adult approaches with teenagers. They don't work as well, and in some cases they don't work at all. So when you're looking for effective approaches, make sure that it's clear that it has been adapted to an adolescent's emotional developmental needs, their social needs, their cognitive abilities. You know, is it matching where they're at and their ability to problem solve and think? We also know that effective treatments do exist. That's the great news. Even though it sounds hard to treat adolescent substance use, we do know that effective treatments do exist. And the key is finding a program that's a good match to your theoretical orientation. What are you comfortable practicing with, and your organization's goals. You know, what are your goals as an organization? Is it to foster greater family involvement? Is it to what age range are you looking at, like matching those treatments to where you're comfortable working and what your goals are will help you be successful as well. And as I mentioned, all evidence-based programs have the same core. They all need to involve the family, use CBT to target the thoughts, the feelings, and the behaviors, and behavioral interventions to increase motivation. And we talked about 3, but there are plenty, and on the next slide there are links to where you can find more treatments. I just focused on 3 that have a large research base behind them. The contingency management, which ties the rewards to better choices and looks at the functions of the drug use. The CBT, which is really digging into your thoughts and your feelings and your problem solving. And the BSFT, which is really looking at those family interactions and really digging into that. Great. Here are some resources. So if you want any more information about contingency management, here's the website and information from NIDA. If you want some CBT training opportunities or more information, there's a little box with some CBT. BSFT, the website will give you everything you need there. And then the last box is additional resources. There is a national registry of evidence-based practices. You can go there, kind of type in what you're looking for and see what's available. National Institute of Health also publishes what they call the Principles of Adolescent Substance Use Disorder Treatment, a research-based guide, and it brings together all of the current research on adolescent addictions treatment, what effective treatments are available, and how to access them. It's a really great resource. And then Blueprints for Health Youth Development also has a list of great programs as well. So let me see. Questions, here's all of my contact info. You can call me anytime, email me, text, whatever it is if you have questions. I did get a question in the chat box. Any advice on starting a youth support group open to the public? That's a tough one. What I've seen successful with youth support groups is also having a parent support group, where you're using a similar curriculum in a sense, where the youth can support each other, but then the parents also learn about what struggles their child's going through and how they can best support them. I've seen folks have a lot of success with those. So, I mean, I think I would start there. What we do recommend with support groups is that you be very careful on what ages you allow in the support group. There's issues with kids being exposed to, younger kids being exposed to things that older kids are doing, and also being mindful of what the kids are struggling with. So if you have a support group of kids using marijuana, it might not be great to throw in a couple of kids that use heroin as well. Because as we saw, heroin use is a low-frequency use among teenagers. It's also very severe and highly lethal. And to be blunt, we don't want to give other kids any ideas about that. So that's usually what we recommend is if you have a youth support group, pair it with a parent support group. And when you create the groups, have the participants be similar ages, but also similar experiences. So, limit it to mainly, alcohol or marijuana use, which we know are very prevalent. And you might also, if you have the flexibility, look at severity too. If you have a kid who's been using for years, they might send a far different message to another kid in the support group who's maybe just been using for a few months. Because it's very hard to sell the idea that drugs are bad if one of the other kids in the group is like, I've been using for 3 years, look at me, I'm still walking and talking. It's hard to sell that to the younger kids. So that's what I would recommend on any support groups, is just being mindful of who the participants are and if there's anything you don't want them learning from each other in a sense. So that's a great question. Let me scroll down here. Okay, cool. Anyone have, what are some positive rewards to use? That's a great one, thank you. So in CM, we are very focused on the rewards, and the rewards have to come from the family or the environment at large. And what we focus on is non-monetary rewards. There's actually little evidence that money will change adolescent behavior. Money will change adult behavior. They have, taxes and rent and things like that. Money doesn't change teen behavior as much. And the reason, and you can see this with BSFT, is because those family relations, those social relations and things are far more important to teenagers than some adults. So the rewards that we come up with are around social interactions, family time, positive peer interactions, and I can give a couple examples. When I was a CM therapist, I had a teenage boy who had pretty chronic drug use, and in CM you have one session that's just focused on rewards, and you just meet with the kid and you dream about what you want to work towards, what will help you be motivated. And he said he wanted whitening toothpaste. And I really thought I was pulling my leg and kind of making a joke of the whole thing. And so I'm like, I don't understand, like whitening toothpaste? So we talked a little bit about it. And what we talked about with the toothpaste is that he was starting to be more concerned about his appearances and how he felt about himself. He had decreased drug use. He was starting to see some of the positive outcomes of that, and was just starting to feel better about himself. And he told me, my parents just use this awful baking soda toothpaste. I want something whitening to give me a nice smile. And what we ended up doing is really digging into rewards around how he felt about himself. And so that was the main focus, is he did get his whitening toothpaste, but we also talked about personal hygiene. We talked about how he can present himself to people in more positive ways. He had rewards around clothing he could work towards, opportunities to spend time with friends, that kind of thing. So his rewards all became around that. We've had other kids where the reward was that, my dad comes in the morning and yells at me to get out of bed and yanks the blankets off, and I hate it and it's awful. And the reward was he won't do that. So so there's a million positive rewards that can be done. But what we look for is things that are not based on money, that are more social and family growth development opportunities. And we also look at rewards as the absence of something bad. So can we stop something negative as a reward as well? So let's see here. Yes, the worksheets should be available for printout and use. The 3 worksheets and the PowerPoint slides should be available. Let's see. I want to make sure I didn't miss anybody. I don't think so. Sorry, I'm kind of scrolling. I want to make sure I captured stuff. Any last questions or thoughts or concerns anybody has, I'd be happy to answer. But like I said, you can certainly email me at any time. I can provide any of the resources we talked about today or answer questions you might have down the road, because as a CM consultant, I know the importance of follow-up after a training, so I don't want anyone to feel that they've been left hanging. If you have a question down the road, please do not hesitate to reach out. But if there aren't any other questions, I think that's all I have for today.
Jaime, thank you so much. We appreciate you sharing your expertise with us, and lots of great resources. So that looks really interesting to explore too. We appreciate it very much. And Jaime, if you're ready, I will go ahead and take control back of the presentation for some concluding remarks.
Great, thank you.
Just to remind everyone that when I conclude today's webinar, your browser is going to take you to an evaluation on FADA's online community. If you want to receive CE credits or a statement of credit for today's event, do please complete the evaluation. And also, just to repeat something I said at the beginning of the session, we will be making the presentation available in a print version and the ancillary handouts as well. They'll be on our website probably right at the beginning of next week. We should be able to do that. You will be when you do go to when you get routed over to our website, you will be prompted to register or sign in to complete the evaluation. And do remember, you can register as a visitor at no cost. After you do register or sign in, you'll be directed onward to the evaluation. And But if you don't have time to do the evaluation right now, that's okay. You're going to receive a second opportunity to complete the evaluation through a follow-up email later today. You're going to get that in about 30 minutes, and the sender is Messenger at WebEx or FADA on demand, may be how you see it as well. Just a reminder that the evaluation will close at midnight on Monday, July 2. After we verify your attendance and completion of the evaluation, a statement of credit will be generated as a journal entry within your profile, again, within the online community. And you'll be notified when a statement of credit has been generated on your behalf. You'll get a type of notice from info@fada.org. So again, Jaime, just thank you very much. It's been very informative today. And I also want to thank all of the participants. We've had well over 200 people participating today, and that's always great. And then, of course, we also want to take a moment to recognize and thank especially the Florida Department of Children and Families, Office of Substance Abuse and Mental Health for funding today's education. So in closing, just have a great rest of your day, and hold now, please, for the evaluation. Thanks, everyone.